Hello and welcome back to Catalyze Yourself. I'm your host, Gayatri, and today we are arriving at a meaningful point in our journey together. In our last several episodes, we built something important, a way of understanding the mind, of returning to presence, and of leading ourselves through awareness and alignment. We explored the SIRE model, our blueprint for conscious leadership. We moved through the practices of HALT, rise, and shift, the rhythm that activates our awareness in real time. And we've seen how presence and peace can begin to shape the way we lead, both inwardly and outwardly. And now, in this episode, we arrive at something that may feel quiet, but it is anything but passive: self-reflection. This is the thread that ties everything together, because insight does not lead to change on its own. Presence does not become peace by accident, and leadership, the kind that you can sustain with authenticity, comes not just from intention, but from consistent reflection. So today, we talk about what I believe is the true superpower of conscious growth, not in what we know, but in how we stay in relationship with what we have learned. Self-reflection is not just a practice, it becomes an ecosystem that sustains everything we've talked about so far. It is the vessel that holds our self-awareness, our inspiration, our regulation, and our expression, and allows them to keep evolving. It is the space where the rhythm of halt, rise, and shift becomes not a checklist, but essentially a way of life. So, if you've ever felt like you know what to do, but still find yourself drifting, if you've had the insight, but struggled to keep active in your day to day, then do stay with me, because this episode is the practice that keeps our presence alive and our growth connected. So let's begin by getting clear on what self-reflection actually is, and just as importantly, what it is not. Because for many of us, the word reflection can bring up all sorts of associations. It could be replay loops. It could be where you think reflection is second guessing. It could be overanalyzing about what you said or didn't say. You may think reflection is those late night voice that questions everything, but that's not reflection. That is a pattern of rumination. That's mental overwork dressed up as insight. True self-reflection is not judgmental. It is not about editing ourselves or revisiting moments to find what we did wrong. Self-reflection is not punitive. It is so learning focused and growth oriented. It is about becoming aware of what is unfolding within us so we can choose to move forward with awareness, not as an autopilot response. It's about noticing the patterns we have inherited or developed and asking gently, is this still true? Is this still serving me? Do I still want to keep choosing from here? It is about observing our own selves with enough clarity to stay connected and enough compassion to stay curious. Self-reflection is the practice that lets our insights stay alive. It is how we catch the moment before our reaction. It is how we see the story before it becomes a spiral. It is how we become responsive. It is how we return again and again to the version of us that leads from the moment we are in, from our presence. not perfection, not pressure, just presence. So, in today's episode, when I talk about the superpower of self reflection, I am not talking about sitting down periodically once a week, daily with a journal and rehashing everything. I am talking about something much more quieter and more consistent and far more powerful than we realize. It is a moment in the middle of your day when we say, wait, what is actually happening within me right now? This is the beginning of every shift we want to make. And maybe you're asking, how do I know? What if what the voice inside me that I'm hearing are my reflections and my intuition and not my anxiety? That is such a real question. And the truth is, it takes practice to learn the difference. But self reflection is what helps you hear more clearly over time. Anxiety tends to sound urgent. Anxiety tends to leverage mindsets that are not on the positive side. It could be scarcity, it could be hesitation, it could be where you are anticipating catastrophe. It pressures you, it loops, it demands answers from you. Intuition is quieter. It doesn't rush, it doesn't escalate. It is not what you would hear as a worry. It is something you hear as information. It often comes as a calm knowing, and not always with full logic, but it comes with full presence. The more we practice reflection, the more we pause and check in, the more familiar those inner voices become. And with time, we'll start to sense this is a protective thought. This is a worry, not a guiding one. This fear sounds loud, but it is not the voice I need to follow right this moment. And that is the beauty of reflection. It does not just help you hear yourself, it helps you trust yourself. And here's something deeper we don't often talk about. Intuition is a function of your consciousness, and it is not always found in your conscious mind, your awareness. Sometimes it speaks through our body. Sometimes it shows up in our dreams, our emotional reactions, or the tension we carry without explanation. And you know what those layers are? It's our subconscious and our unconscious. This is where our subconscious and unconscious layers hold memory, pattern, instinct, and our intuition rises from within them. But to access that intuitive voice, you have to recognize it, to trust it. And we need a practice that helps us listen. That is what self reflection does. Self reflection helps us navigate the layers of our mind without judgment, so we can begin to discern between what is protective and what is true, between what is habit and what is inner guidance, between what is anxiety and what is alignment. This is how our relationship with our intuition matures, not through force, through quiet presence, through quiet noticing, through quiet reflection. And we build that relationship with our intuition. We will see in time, as we learn to sense what's true and what's ours, what's asking for our attention, in time we will begin to notice something else. Insight alone isn't enough. We need something that can hold it, because growth does not just come from awareness. It comes from what we do with that awareness, how we stay in relationship with that, how we return to it, how we allow it to shape the way we live and lead. And this is where self-reflection reveals its deeper purpose, not as a one-time check-in, not as a daily note, not as a weekly note, but as an ecosystem that surrounds the blueprint of conscious leadership. It's the steady space that helps us carry what we learn and grow with it. When we speak of conscious leadership, we are not speaking about something linear. It is not a sequence, it is not a ladder, it is not a list you move through. It is a system, a way of being, a structure for how we live with presence. And what holds the structure, what allows us to adapt, stretch, and evolve is self-reflection. Self-reflection is truly the ecosystem that surrounds the blueprint of conscious leadership. It is what allows awareness to deepen, inspiration to stay connected, regulation to become sustainable, and expression to remain aligned over time. Without self-reflection, even the most powerful inner structure can begin to drift. And with it, your inner system becomes grounded and spacious. So now let's take a deep breath together and explore, what does this truly mean? When we consider self-awareness within the sphere of self-reflection, it becomes so much more than observation. It becomes a healthy relationship, one that builds slowly with honesty. We start to notice our own cues without being asked. We feel our habits before they turn into behaviors. We begin to develop an intimacy with our own patterns, not to fix them, but to understand what they're trying to teach you. This isn't the kind of awareness that rushes to correct. It is the kind that stays present long enough for something meaningful to emerge. Moving to self-inspiration, we see that reflection allows us to stay connected to what lights us up, inspires us, not just in concept, but in real time. In the quiet of reflection, we begin to hear our internal why. Why are we doing this? Why are we intending to move in the way we are? Why have we kept ourselves in the space that we have? And we hear this why more clearly. Not the polished version, not the public-facing one, the one that reminds us, this is what matters to me, without an audience. We notice when we are drifting away from meaning. We recognize when we are overperforming and under-connecting. And we start choosing differently, not because someone told us to, but because we feel the cost of it internally when we don't. Reflection doesn't just reconnect us to purpose. It reminds us that our purpose is allowed to evolve, and we are allowed to evolve with it. Now let's go to self-regulation. Self-regulation without reflection becomes momentary. But with reflection, it becomes internalized and consistent. It's no longer random. It becomes the way you are, no matter what comes your way. We begin to notice the buildup before the overwhelm. We feel the contraction before it becomes a reaction. And instead of pushing through, we pause with intention. This is self-leadership, led by awareness, guided by compassion, allowing you to regulate with the help of your self-reflection. Over time, reflection teaches our nervous system something it did not always know or believe. It teaches the nervous system of ours, I don't have to brace for everything. No matter what I have experienced in my lifetime this far, I am allowed to respond at the pace of my presence. And self expression thrives within this ecosystem of self reflection. When self expression is held in reflection, our communication softens. And at the same time, it sharpens and becomes more clear. Not in performance, just simply in honesty. We become more aware of the tone beneath our words, the silence beneath our reactions, the energy beneath our boundaries. And in that awareness, we learn to speak in a way that honors our clarity without abandoning our kindness. We react from fear less and less and start expressing more and more from presence. We start to speak to connect with ourselves first. And then comes the rest of the world. And this is what's going to create that trust for you within yourself. Not just with those who we lead, not just those who we have surrounding us. It's so much more importantly with our own self. And before we move on, I want to pause here and share something that may support the path you're walking today, whether you're exploring how to lead your life with intention, how to lead others with presence, or how to reconnect with what matters the most to you. Conscious leadership asks of you to lead with presence, not control, not pressure. If you're ready to deepen your impact and lead with clarity, let us begin with a discovery call. It is free, and if we move forward, you can use code LEAD20 and get 20% off your first session or coaching package. Great leadership grows from the inside out. Visit www.realize2win.com to get started with me. If self-reflection is what sustains SIRE within us, it is also what allows us to move through the practices that activate it, halt, rise, and shift. And these are not just steps to follow. These are practices that call for presence, and presence requires reflection. We can't practice halt without noticing what we are carrying. We are not able to practice rise without recognizing what is pulling us down. And we are not able to shift if you're not aware of the pattern we've been living in. And what does this all mean in a practical sense? Let's walk through how self-reflection supports halt, rise, and shift. Halt invites us to pause, but it's reflection that helps us pause with purpose. When we reflect regularly, we start to feel the difference between I'm just tired, I'm exhausted, and I'm emotionally depleted from holding something unspoken. We begin to recognize when we are over functioning and when we are hesitating because of fear, not because of intuition, when we are avoiding that what actually needs our presence. Halt becomes meaningful only when we have made the time to reflect on what is underneath our urgency and not just respond and react to the surface. Rise helps us return, and it is self-reflection that gives that return the direction back to self. Through reflection, we start to ask, what kind of presence am I bringing into this space? What intention is leading my tone, my words, my timing? Where is my body? Where in my body am I holding something I haven't yet acknowledged? Without reflection, intention becomes just a hope, a desire. With reflection, intention becomes a choice. And rise becomes deeper when we are willing to reflect in real time, to slow the loop, to check back in with who we are, and to return from what that was not keeping us in presence. Now, when we go to shift, shift asks us to lead from presence. And it is reflection that shows us whether we are doing that or simply going through the motions. It's reflection that helps us notice, am I leading from alignment? Did I just flip into an old habit? Do I need to stop again and listen a little bit more deeply? The more we reflect, the more natural the shift becomes. It stops being something we remember to do, and it starts becoming something we notice we're already doing. That is when your leadership and your life begins to shift from effort to just who you naturally are, to embodiment, or just the way you live your life. So when we talk about halt, rise, and shift, we are talking about a rhythm, but self-reflection, that's what gives that rhythm its depth. It's how the rhythm becomes rooted. It's what allows you to carry you, guide you, support you again and again with clarity and just consideration and care. I want to pause here and speak to something I hear often in my personal life, in my coaching, and sometimes it's said out loud and sometimes it's held a little bit more quietly, and it is felt. And that is, all of this sounds good, but I don't have time for it. I have kids, aging parents, a full workload, a partner who needs me, and I barely have space to breathe, let alone reflect. This kind of reflection is for people with less responsibility, people who have quiet moments in the morning and space to think. That is not me. And trust me, I hear that. And I want to say this gently. Self-reflection is not about having more time. It is about choosing to move within you in the present moment and being present inside of you with the time you already have. You do not need a perfect calendar arrangement. You do not need to find specific time for it. You don't need an hour. You don't even need silence or stillness or solitude. You just need to first decide to start integrating that into your life. You just need a few breaths of honesty, a few check ins as you drive for a school drop off, or between meetings, or while folding laundry. Reflection is not the thing that happens as your day ends, it's the pause that happens within your day. The moment you ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Is the way I'm moving through this aligned with what matters to me? Sometimes it's a mom I work with who realizes that every yes she says is not coming from alignment. It is just coming from how exhausted she is. Sometimes it is someone who's caring for a partner who pauses long enough to hear themselves say, I'm depleted and I haven't admitted that to anyone. Sometimes it's a team leader who's finally noticed that they're overcompensating, not because it was a strategic option, but because of fear of being judged. In each case, the circumstances did not change immediately, but they changed because they started to hear themselves again. That's what this practice offers. Not an escape, but a return, even for a few breaths. And in that return, we find a kind of strength that does not come from control. It truly comes from your presence in the moment you are in. And maybe for you, reflection won't happen with a journal or a formal practice. Maybe it starts with a moment at the kitchen sink. Maybe it happens as a walk around the block after a tense conversation or a quiet pause in your car before walking into the next room. All of that counts because reflection isn't about how it looks. It is about whether it allows you to hear yourself again. Sometimes leadership purely in life means asking, am I holding too much? Am I giving from depletion? What's the cost of the space? And sometimes it's even more tender. Have I been so focused on doing it all that I have stopped noticing what I need? This is what reflection makes possible. Not a dramatic change, a simple, quiet reconnection to what matters, to what hurts, to what is being asked of you, and what you're allowed to as far as you want to go to return to yourself. And leadership, it's absolutely not just for work. Conscious leadership is about living. It is how we live in our homes, our relationships, our bodies. And if your role asks you to be in whichever space, could be professional or personal, conscious leadership is how you lead yourself and, as an extension, others. It is how we move through the world, not with an expectation of perfection, simply presence. And when we reflect, even in small, fragmented moments, without judgment, we make room for the truth to return. And with that possibility, we now are able to choose differently. And very good chances are you've already been reflecting more than you even realize. Every time you've paused before saying yes, every time you've noticed your own tone and softened it, every time you thought, I didn't love how I just handled that, I want to do it differently next time, that is all reflection. It's not always formal, it's not always conscious, but it's there, woven into how you show up in your life, your just your surroundings, your people, and yes, even your work. And at the same time, there's also this huge possibility that it's often the first thing to get deprioritized when life gets full, when work ramps up, when caregiving for kids, partners, parents intensifies, when there's too much to hold and not enough space to breathe. There is always a possibility that reflection tends to fade into the background. Not because it's not needed, but because it is quiet. It's not demanding. And life gets full of other things that demands your attention. Self-reflective behaviors are often the first to fall away. Not because we did not recognize they were valuable, because when the urgency rises, it's always the quiet that drowns out. If we are not intentional, the potential for what feels like a lot of chaos around us can make us stop listening to what is quiet. So this isn't about starting something new for so many of us. It is about recognizing what you're already doing and choosing to bring a little bit more intention to it, especially when everything around you asks you to prioritize everything else but it. Because those are the moments that matters the most. After having said all that, now it's time to close out today's episode. And I want to leave you with this thought. Self-reflection is not a practice for when things slow down. It is not a practice you leave for the quiet moments in your life. It is truly a presence you carry through no matter what pace of life you're living. It is not something to achieve to perfection. It is something to return to with grace, gently, consistently, in the small, real moments that make up your days. This is the space that allows conscious leadership to grow, not from performance, but from awareness. And it is what keeps your SIRE system alive. It is what gives your HALT rise and shift their rhythm. And it is what helps you return again and again to the truth of who you are, even when your life and your capacity is in a state of full. Reflection does not ask you to stop everything. It just asks you to stay with yourself, regardless of everything that's happening in your life. And that is what makes it a superpower. That's what makes presence sustainable and peace possible. And next week, we continue this journey by exploring what it means to align the parts of your mind that often feels like they're speaking in completely different languages. In episode 14, we dive into aligning head and heart. We talk about how bringing our thoughts, our feelings, and our deeper awareness into a shared conversation is so important for our presence, and how the SIRE model gives you the tools to do just that. Because when we integrate our mind, not just manage it, not just control it, integrate our mind, we lead from our wholeness. And when leadership becomes intentional, it becomes natural. Thank you for reflecting with me today. I'm your host, Gayatri, and until next time, keep noticing, keep staying with yourself, and keep choosing presence. One breath, one decision, one moment at a time.